All right, looks like we're good. And welcome everybody to a very special Workflow Wednesday. This one's a little different. We're actually going to be talking with Matt Bach here. He's our industry expert for the week, to kind of get a look more into how we do things, our workflow, or at least in labs. And yeah, so that's pretty cool. This was actually kind of exciting because I'm really curious about this too. So this will be really fun. So just in case, as always, if anybody doesn't already know, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do, Matt.
Oh, weird. I haven't been on this end. I've been on a lot of these streams as like a interviewer, but not as the actual person who's on here. So my name is Matt Bach. I've been with Puget for a long time. I think it's like 18 years or something. So I started at Puget when I was still in high school. And I've gone through a plethora of things, pretty much anything that is not directly customer facing, I've done. So production, repair, all that kind of stuff. And then, I don't know how many years ago we started labs. It might be like 8 or 9 or even 10 years ago, we started up the labs department. And for the longest time, that was just me. So I pretty much built out what labs is, and it's grown and changed. It started off being like hardware reviews, think like Tom's Hardware and Nantech, those kind of guys. And then we just discovered that we were just doing what they are already doing, only worse, because they do a really good job with that kind of stuff. So then we pivoted at the same time when we started moving into workstations as a workstation company, or as a computer company, I should say. We pivoted towards testing things that those hardware reviews didn't. So at the time, one of the big things we started off with was the Adobe suite, so Photoshop, Premiere Pro. Those are still some of our biggest staples, but it's just expanded beyond that to now we do a lot of hardware testing, a lot of benchmarking, a lot of having to develop benchmarks because there are hardware benchmarks for these applications. Like they're not made to be benchmarked, so we have to figure out how to do it. And that part's difficult, and I'm sure we'll get into that more. But so now the labs department, we're looking at content creation stuff, engineering, game development is a big one that we're just really starting to get into. We just got Kelly on team because, man, game development's crazy. Like it's not just for games, it's for VR stuff, which could be anything, architecture, training, medical. It's also used in like film and animation, and it's just a crazy wide industry. And so we've been expanding out to all that stuff. We've got some scientific and HPC stuff, and yeah, it's great. It's really interesting. It's really frustrating sometimes.
Sure.
But it's also cool because we've been working a lot on making all of the testing we're doing available to the public. Not just like the results or our hardware articles, but like the actual marks themselves.
Right.
So that's a pretty big deal too, I think.
Yeah, that's actually that's pretty cool actually. I think I mean it's really nice that we just kind of let that stuff kind of go out there for free. Even like you can run the exact same tool that you guys use to produce the articles. I can download and just use that at home.
Yeah.
And I think
that takes a lot of work.
Yeah, actually, and that's actually that kind of leads us to a really good question. Is for at least for me, first, how do you decide what to test? Like where does that come from?
You mean like what software, or like what within that software to test?
I suppose both. We'll start with what software, and then from there, what within that.
Yeah, well, the software, that's kind of determined a lot by our workstation side. So it's whatever we have high interest in. So like we sell a lot of systems for Premiere Pro, so we're going to test it. We don't sell very many systems for Vegas, which is another video editor. So it's not really worth our time because right now our labs department is essentially funded by our workstation sales. So we need to be able to be bringing in enough people and like converting enough sales. So like adding enough value to the workstation sale for them to go with us instead of Dell or whatever. And there's the whole like support and pre-sale side of things too, in the production side. But our own little slice of the pie, we have to be able to justify essentially. So that's a big part. There's also another part of how difficult is it?
Oh, sure.
because there's a few applications out there, like a lot of the rendering, so Octane Render, V-Ray, Cinebench, there's already benchmarks for. So
Sure.
us testing it and doing like articles is very low effort because we just take their thing, we add some automation on top of it to make it easier for us, and we're done. So those ones, super simple. So even if we don't sell a whole lot of systems for it, we can do it because the return on investment, like they're so low investment, we don't have to have a whole lot of return.
Sure.
So it's mostly that. There's a few that we like look ahead towards, like DaVinci Resolve. We started testing a number of years back, and we didn't sell very many systems for it, but we saw that it was an up and coming thing, so we wanted to get ahead of the curve, kind of a thing.
Smart.
And then there's others that are kind of the opposite. We really want to do stuff with Avid Media Composer. It's a video editor, and it's really, really hard to test. So we haven't yet. It's one of the things that like we'd like to, but it's just so difficult to do that it's just been slipped under because like, well, the time we could spend on that, or we can test the entire Adobe suite. Like,
oh, sure.
We're going to do that.
It's that tough.
So that's kind of determines what we're going to test. Within the applications, that gets harder. It's harder than I think people might think because we're actually having to satisfy multiple audiences. There's the people who use the software professionally. They care about certain things. They care about like what they do every day. And some of it is very unexciting. It's like, and it's some things that we don't even test still that we probably should. Things like how snappy is the program? But like, how do you test snappiness?
Yeah, that's kind of
really
objective,
difficult,
right? That's because like I know we've gotten comments like for Photoshop, like testing, the brush, like moving this brush in a certain way, like sometimes it's jumpy, or like how can I get this to, or scrubbing. I suppose scrubbing might be, but that's somewhat still of a objective. You got to see it to make it feel right.
You could, and actually we have a project going on right now where we're testing some scrubbing stuff. And the way we did it though is we just went totally like, we're not going to worry about numbers. We're not going to try to report FPS or anything. We just recorded a video, and here we have a mouse, and like we automated the mouse moving across like the timeline. But other than that, here's two videos side by side, because like if you actually want to tell how many frames per second it is, if you want to do it on the fly, you can, but you're going to have to be watching every single frame. So, if you have a 60 hertz monitor, that's 60 times a second, you're going to have to be checking and doing like pixel checksums to see if things moved. And that's going to make your system, it's going to put enough load on your system that it's going to warp the results.
Right.
Or you take it in afterwards and process it afterwards and like count the frames as they change. And that's just super labor intensive.
Sure. You kind of did that in the, actually, wait, can I talk about that? The GPU decoding?
Whatever. I mean, we have a project going on for the Premiere Pro GPU decoding, and we're waiting until that software. It's in beta right now. We're waiting for it to come out of beta before we launch a bunch of stuff.
Okay. Well, I do remember seeing that as an example, kind of a side by side.
Yeah.
So okay, that's cool.
And that works fine. That works fine if it's like a major difference, which this one adding GPU decoding is a major difference. Like you can see it. But if it's a small difference, like if we want to do that exact same test and compare like two different GPUs, one might be better than another, but oh man, it's going to be, you can't tell by your human eye, like whether it's going to be better or not. Okay. So that's where you have to get into like these really small numbers. And that's kind of where we get into the second target audience of ours, not the end users, but like the tech enthusiasts, the people who are trying to decide like, what CPU should I buy for my home computer? And like, I do a little bit of editing, I do a little bit of gaming, maybe I do some streaming, or just the people who are just like, I want Intel to win, or no, I want AMD to win, those people too. And so, it's a weird thing in our benchmarks because we have to satisfy both audiences because, I mean, it's just two different types of readers who are coming to us looking for this information. So there are some things we test that like the end users don't really care about all that much. And then there's other things we test where the people who are more techie and not end users don't care about. Good example of that is we do recently the GPUs that launched from NVIDIA, the 3000 series.
Yeah.
We did testing in Lightroom and Photoshop for GPU performance, and it's the most boring results ever. It's just a straight line. Every
Right.
GPU is the same. These software has GPU acceleration, but like having a GPU is the only thing you really need. The GPU's no different. And like to someone who wants to talk about how much better NVIDIA is than AMD or vice versa, that's not really useful because like, yeah, they're the same, great, whatever. But to an end user, that's super useful because then like, okay, I don't need an RTX 3090. I can get a 2060.
Sure. Okay.
Great. And they can save a whole bunch of money. So
Yeah.
it is kind of, odd having to satisfy both of those creators. Plus, it's even a little bit more now because, like we were talking about before, having our benchmarks available to the public. Part of that is we're trying to get hardware reviewers to start using them as well. So again, think like an Entech, Tom's Hardware. I think Tom's Hardware, they have a few of their sites that are using some of our stuff now, and like YouTubers.
That's super cool.
Because that's kind of like us doing our part of in the community. But it's also like we can't test everything. Laptops, we don't test laptops, but laptops are a big thing. So if we can help reviewers who test laptops, that helps everybody. But the hardware reviewers have even more different needs. Like they need it to be highly static of a benchmark so it doesn't change. So we can't like, oh, Adobe added this new feature, let's just toss it into the benchmark. They would hate us for that because now all their scores are different. And most of them don't retest their testing or redo their testing every time there's a new product launch. We do, but we're really weird. And that's because we update like all of our app versions, Windows. We try to make all of our stuff as up to date as possible. But that means that like if it's been more than a month since we did some testing, we have to redo everything. And most of those hardware reviewers, they'll use results that are years old, and they just don't change their version of Windows. They don't change the app versions because all they care about is hardware. They don't care about like the software or like the real world performance. They just care about like hardware versus hardware. So like if the benchmark changes, they have to redo everything, and they're not set up for that.
That seems a little strange because like there have been times where something as simple as like a BIOS update or just a version change to the software can actually make a significant difference in the hardware performance. So,
but I mean, this kind of comes out to I think they have to look at ROI too, like how much effort versus how much return they get. And I think a lot of those things, like I have no official information from any of these guys, but I would assume since they're making all their money by ads, like they've got to have so much traffic, they have to spend so like minimal effort to get things live that and they don't have like the kind of setups that we have. Like we're also unique in that we have like hardware available. Hey, we don't talk, or we don't have this piece of hardware up here to do this test, but hey, it's in inventory. We'll go grab it. We'll borrow it for a couple hours, run the test, and then return it. They would have to like buy the product or beg Intel, AMD, or NVIDIA to give them a sample. So we have a lot of advantage there, because we have, how many test platforms do we have now? It's like a dozen or so test platforms that we have up and running all the time that we just push things to. That's the only way we could do all this testing in time for these product launches. We just do it in highly parallel. And I think a lot of those guys, they just do like one thing at a time, and they just swap the CPU, run the next one, swap the CPU, run the next one. And it's tough.
Wow. So we do have a question from YouTube, and I was curious about this myself. No Need for a Name asks, what makes it hard to benchmark Avid? And I was curious about that myself. Why, like, what about Avid makes it more tough than Premiere?
It's the like the framework or the API that's available. So in the past, how we started out doing our benchmarking is we used a programming or scripting language called AutoIt. We still use it heavily today, but basically it's an automation. So like you can look at the title of a window, you can tell like what buttons are, and you can click on the buttons, you can read text from a window, and that was great. And that still works fairly well on a lot of things. But what's been more and more difficult is that a lot of these applications are actually moving to Chromium. So it's basically your application is Chrome just running in a little window, and and like that's it. It's not going through like the Windows layers of things. It's just Chrome. So in
That's
fact, like
interesting.
Slack is Chromium. I think most of the Adobe stuff is Chromium. So like Photoshop, that's just a Chrome window. It's a browser, and it's just
Oh,
packaged with the application. And
wow.
so, but the thing that makes that hard is Chromium has a whole bunch of security stuff about not making it so you can read or automate or click things. Like it's an anti-malware or anti-ransomware or whatever. So that means automation is pretty much out the window.
Wow.
Doing it from like an external. So uh, we have to rely heavily on internal tools. And like Adobe, they have a really great API for like plugins. So how
Hmm.
we do things is that we actually make a plugin. Our benchmark is a plugin, and it can control things in Premiere Pro, like what sequence to open, to play, what the FPS was for the playback, export and
Right.
export times, and all that kind of stuff. We can do all
Wow.
internal, and we only have to do a few little things. I think like in Premiere, we have to call an automation to like right click on the preview window and change it to like multicam or composite or change the playback resolution. But
Okay.
those things, luckily, we can just do like a right click, go down 8 times, go over once, go down. It's hokey, but it works because those things never change.
Wow.
But we do actually, even that one, we have requests into Adobe to add that functionality to their API. And Adobe is actually really great. They've helped a lot with a lot of our benchmarks.
Oh,
But it's
cool.
tough for them because like they have small. I think a lot of their teams are smaller than people realize, and
Oh, yeah.
they're rushing or trying to get all bugs fixed and these new features in because they always have to add new features and all of this and all that. And like taking a request from us to like add this little thing to their API hooks because it'll benefit us
Please.
is really hard. It's really hard for them to justify. And I totally get it.
Huh.
So we just keep poking them every once in a while. We try to get, other people to kind of poke them like, hey, yeah, you should do that. But going back to the original question about Avid is I don't think Avid has nearly as much in the way of being able to automate things. I know there is like a plugin API, but when I looked at it, it wasn't very robust.
Okay.
It's one reason why people ask us to test Capture One, which is a Lightroom competitor, kind of.
Okay.
And same thing, like their API is really bad. It
Huh.
can do a few things, but as far as like, importing things, maybe it does importing, but like actually like doing things within it, it's just
Hmm.
not made for that. And honestly, I'm a little bit surprised at how much you can do with the Adobe APIs because like who is doing this besides us? Like the
Right.
only other people is like the internal devs at Adobe, when they're doing like testing. And so they
Yeah.
just built it into their API to make their lives easier, and we're able to just piggyback on that. So
Wow,
we're
that's
kind of a
cool.
little lucky that Adobe we can
Yeah.
do that. So that's
Wow.
what makes things really hard. It's security pretty much.
Okay.
Everything's going towards Chromium, and
Right.
Chromium's extra secure, which makes automation really hard. But it's better for the end users, but it's really hard for us.
Yeah. Well, it's cool though that we've built that kind of relationship where
Mm-hmm.
where we can kind of maybe get around that sort of a thing. That
Yeah.
maybe they trust us enough to work close in hand where to get around it. That's
Yeah,
kind of
well,
cool.
and actually, that's another reason why we're putting our benchmarks out to the public and trying to push them onto reviewers. Because we do have a paid version that has like command line stuff. It allows people to not upload results to our public database, so we don't have
Hmm.
leaks constantly. Which we have things to prevent leaks too, because people are really bad about not uploading results.
Gotcha.
But things like that they should need. But we give press a free license, and then the paid ones are mostly for people who'd be making money off of it. So think like our competitors.
Sure.
So if Dell or HP wanted to use our benchmarks, that's directly removing like one of our advantages. So we
Yeah.
need to be able to compensate that through a license sale. And that's one of the reasons why they're pretty expensive, the benchmark
Right.
licenses, is because really like no one using it for like the home use needs the commercial version. And
Sure.
the people that do are basically our competitors because so we need to charge them out, a lot.
Yeah. That
And if
makes
they're
sense.
press, we'll give them a press license. So
Yeah.
like they don't need to pay.
That's pretty cool.
But
Oh,
sorry, I lost my
oh
thought.
no.
So, but one of the reasons why that's really nice and we're pushing that is because then there is more of a benefit to, say, Adobe adding those API hooks to make the benchmark more reliable. Because
Right.
if a whole bunch of reviewers are testing it, that's getting more eyeballs on the name Photoshop or whatever,
Sure,
which
sure.
then means a bigger advantage to Adobe if like all of these hardware reviewers are using Photoshop as a staple in their reviews. And even to the point where one of our goals is to like the AMD they launched or they announced the Ryzen 5000 series the other week,
Right. Ooh,
and like
yeah.
we want to be up on stage as one of those things, and like because like they actually did this time. AMD they had gaming and then they had like productivity, and one of them
Oh,
was Premiere Pro. I don't know if it was our benchmark or not, but but we
that'd
want
be
more of
super
that.
cool.
That was the like Adobe thing or like content creation thing up there was Premiere Pro, and like but we want to see Premiere Pro and Photoshop and Lightroom and DaVinci Resolve, and we want to see all of those because those are becoming more important to
Yeah.
everybody because everyone's a content creator these days.
Right. Well, and I also feel like this is helpful for because I think even now most productivity benchmarking is like Cinebench,
Yeah, which
and
is not.
and yeah, it doesn't. I think I've seen it more at least where that isn't really being accepted as a proper like productivity or workstation sort of benchmark. Like this is not
Mhm.
this isn't really testing how what my work performance is going to be, and so
Yeah,
we're offering a kind of a fill in for that gap, which is pretty
yeah.
cool.
Well, what makes all that stuff really difficult when you're talking about real world, like, is this CPU going to be better for me? You can't look at anything really except what you're actually going to be running. Like you mentioned,
Yeah.
Cinebench. Like Cinebench is perfect if you're running like Cinema 40 or using like any other CPU-based renderer. Like it's going to be
Sure.
great. But who does that? Like VFX artists, yeah, do, and motion
Yeah.
graphics, sure. Do video editors? No. Does anyone else? No.
Right.
But at the same time, like we can run Photoshop, but just is Photoshop going to apply to a video editor? No.
Right.
It's in the Adobe. Yeah. If we ran Premiere Pro, will that apply to DaVinci Resolve, which is another video editor? No, it doesn't work at all. It's just as inaccurate as Cinebench. So that's what's really hard. Is like you either have to happen to know exactly how your application is going to use your CPU, GPU, RAM, and storage, how that compares to another program, and know that it matches, which is never going to be the case because nothing ever matches.
Right.
Or you have to test that one actual application. And that's why we do so many different tests and why we have separate articles for every single one. We have an article for Photoshop and one for Lightroom, one for Premiere,
Yep.
because they are just totally different and you can't combine them all into a single like workstation score and say here's how that performs. Like that doesn't work because like a
Right.
photographer is going to be totally different than a video editor. It's going to be totally different than a VFX artist. It's going to be totally different than everything else.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
It is.
But then you also at the same time you get like, well, I use Photoshop and After Effects and Premiere Pro. It's like, oh, okay.
Well, which and that'd be those sort of questions I think are really hard because it's like, well, how much time do you spend in each one?
Hmm.
Which performance is most important?
Yeah, which is most
Um,
annoying.
yeah. Because maybe I do spend a lot of time in Photoshop, but it's After Effects that really chaps my hide, because
Yep.
of whatever. And so maybe
That's
you want to lean heavier on the After Effects side of things.
And that's different for everybody. And that's one of the reasons why, like, we have our recommended systems on our website for Photoshop or Premiere or whatever.
Right.
But we don't right now do any kind of mixed things like, oh, here's a good one for Photoshop and After Effects. We
Right.
kind of have some thoughts on how we might be able to address that, but oh man, it's really hard. The best thing to do is just talk to one of our consultants because they are up to date on all the different testing. They
Right.
know what other people have asked. They know what to ask,
Ooh.
and so then they can say like, okay, well, based on what you're saying, it sounds like we should get you in this CPU with this GPU and this much storage because this will be right for you. And that's really hard to do.
Yeah, I wonder though, as we collect more data from all of the benchmarks we have the option of uploading the results, and I think it collects hardware specs and some of those other things.
Yeah, big stuff.
I wonder then if you could start sort of sorting, like, oh, okay, well
Yep.
here's the hardware, here, I don't know, this particular configuration. What score did it get in the Photoshop benchmark? What score did
Yeah,
it get in the After
that's
Effects? You know,
yeah. Right now, all of our benchmark stuff is very rudimentary. Like we put up the like ability to browse through the benchmark results
right,
mostly because like we want to start collecting that data as soon as
right,
possible. Because once you have enough data, then yeah, you can do some really cool things. And that was one thought, was putting it on like the configure pages, like a selectable, like show me scores for these benchmarks, like the average or something like that.
mm-hmm.
And so people could select it, and like right underneath maybe like the price or something, it would say like, here's the scores for all the software you care about. And it just, yeah, it trolls through. And I mean, that's a lot of
That'd be
processing
cool.
that has to happen on the fly. But there's ways around it. But
Yeah,
yeah, that also though, that's, I don't know, it's tough. It's really tough. And you need a lot of results,
yeah, that's the
because
thing.
like if we
The
have like 4 CPUs on a configure page, and usually we have like 10 video cards, that's
mm-hmm.
4 different combinations of hardware right there, not to mention RAM, storage. So it gets really tough. And a
Yeah,
lot of times I think you just gotta do that legwork manually, or just know that it doesn't matter. So like
yeah,
again, like our consultants, they know that like Photoshop, we don't care about GPU. Oh, but
yeah.
they're using DaVinci Resolve. Okay, so we need a bigger GPU for that. Or the times where yeah, it just doesn't matter. This one application is going to be way more process intensive than this other one. So like, who cares? If someone
Yeah.
says they're using Word, like, okay, great, we don't care.
Word. That'd be fun. Although I do remember a while back there was a customer who had like a massive Excel
Excel.
files
Yeah. Oh, I remember
and
that
like
they were doing weather
how
simulations in Excel.
weather simulations in Excel.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah,
And
I
so
think we
like
even had we had a customer a month or so back. They asked us to do some special testing in Google Sheets.
wow,
They wanted us. They like shared their Google Sheets with us, and they said like, yeah, this takes forever to do this processing. Can you do it on a couple of different CPUs? And we did. And then they bought the one system with the CPU that was way faster, because to them like
that's
people do insane things. They do
that's
really
amazing.
insane things.
Yeah,
And
interesting stuff
that's
though.
Yeah, I mean
Very
that's
cool.
one of the reasons why also that we try to have so many different test platforms. Like our
Hmm.
goal is to have a platform for every CPU we sell, because usually CPU is the limiting factor, or at least
Okay.
every CPU we sell a lot of. Because then, like a customer has that kind of a question, and we're doing these more and more for customers. Like, yeah, we can do that quick test on these 2 different things. We just remote into each system, we run it, and great. Because actually, here I'll share a couple of things.
Ooh, ooh.
Right desktop. I grabbed a couple of pictures before yesterday when I was actually at the office, because I haven't been at the office much. So like this is our lab room where we have kind of like the primary CPUs, so the ones we sell a whole lot of, so that we can do like GPU swaps.
Okay.
And we also have in the server room, it's a mess now because we're just starting to do it.
Oh wow,
We're
look at
starting to
that.
move more and more platforms out to the server room, because like if we're not going to swap GPUs, we don't need the system to be physically right there.
Right.
So we have, how many is that then? 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 if you include the iMac Pro. 12 platforms always available, ready for us to use. And we do that through hardware IP KVMs. So we use these Raritan, they're 4K, so they do 4K output and input, but they're over IP. So you, like from home, I just log into our work VPN, and then I can, actually control the systems. So like, here, I got another picture. But since they're
Whoa.
hardware based, like this is me controlling the BIOS at a system at work from home.
That's
And so
cool.
like we can do BIOS changes, we can update the BIOS, we can install Windows, we can do anything. And all that like security stuff, like UAC stuff in
Hmm.
Windows, doesn't matter, because like it's a hardware level KVM essentially, and we can even do like Mac or Linux. Like it's completely OS agnostic, which is
Wow.
great for us because then we can do whatever. It's not affecting performance at all. Like there's no like processing going on the computer to
Right.
like
Because it's
send
not
these
like it's not
things.
like Team Viewer or something.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. And then
wow.
we can even do like oftentimes I have this kind of a setup. I'll have four windows, and they're just four different systems, and they're just running. I can keep an eye on them. I can run things. I can do things manually. In fact, I think I even grabbed this screenshot while I was at work. So I was sitting at my desk, which is like 5 feet away, maybe from the
Yeah.
actual platforms, but I don't want to walk that 5 feet. So I just have all these IPKVM windows open, and I can just control them from right there because it's easier.
Sure. Wow. That's pretty cool. Wow.
Yeah.
Man, that's
Yeah, those things are really nice. They're not cheap because we want 4K, but like
right.
it's one of those things you buy once and we never have to replace it.
Right.
And honestly, like there's a little bit of input lag because it's hardware based, and it's limited to 30 FPS because I don't think we want to stream 4K 60 FPS all the way back. But for us, whatever. Like we're not using it as a actual system we're working on. We just need to like
Right.
start up benchmarks, install stuff, and all that, and yeah, 30 FPS is fine. A little bit of input lag, yeah, we've gotten used to it,
Still,
but
wow. What a
they're really
how
cool.
did like I'm curious how that even came up as an option. Like, what did you even look for that? I don't know. I wouldn't have even.
IPKV, we've used some IPKVMs in the past. They
Okay.
were really crappy, but we just happened to look because I wanted to work from home more. So, what do I need to do so I can work from home more?
I
And it was
see.
actually very fortunate because we started getting these units maybe 6 months before all the coronavirus stuff.
Sure.
So we were actually pretty well set up to be able to work from home, like our whole labs team. And so we just got another, I think it was like six or so of those units, plugged
Nice.
them into the other test platforms. And we really, I think from our labs team, usually like one person is at the office each day. And that's
Okay.
to do like hardware swaps. So just in the morning, we just have a channel on our Slack of like, what do people need? And like, oh, could you swap in this hard drive or this video card into this platform for me? And it's like, sure. And then, so just one person there a day, and it works really, really nicely. It's actually amazing how well they work. I think we've had a few have some issues with like the local HDMI out
Hmm.
must have be like a bad solder point or something because we're getting some video corruption, but that should like the local monitor, like over the IPKVM, it looks fine and great. So we're just kind of like, whatever, it'll work. We don't want to have the downtime of having to RMA it.
Yeah. Um. So I know there's a number of different things we tested for each like set of software. Do we have any sort of like external resource that we tend to go to regularly to find out like what is important to test?
um, External, no. Usually, how we determine what to test, it's two things. One, what do our customers complain about? So we
Sure.
rely on our consultants to tell us that like people really care about this, and
Hmm.
because they're asking all these people. I mean, they're asking hundreds and hundreds of people a month. What's frustrating? So we
Yeah.
can take
Yeah.
all that and turn that into okay. We need to address these things. There's that is a big thing. The second is we have a fixed budget for each labs person. Well, actually, in marketing too. I think you have a budget
Yeah.
for education, but it's like our education budget, and that's to cover. Like normally, next week I would be going to Adobe Max, and
Oh,
I'd be
right.
going to not to like man the booth because usually we would have a booth there too. Not this year because it's virtual, but normally we'd have a booth. But like I would help out in it maybe some because I really
Sure.
enjoy that. But my main goal would be to go to other booths, to go to sessions all day. So I would have a full pass, to go to whatever sessions, and I would just cram as many sessions as possible, just to see like what are people talking about, what's new, what things come up, what questions get asked during those sessions. So even right now, I think I just finalized my session list for Adobe Max, and it's just 9 to 5, just solid.
Wow.
And even if
Wow.
there's not anything that like I'm super interested in for a time section, like it's in my budget to go, so I need to get my dollar value out of it. So I
Sure.
put in something, anything, because who
Nice.
knows what kind of things will come up. So like this year, it's a lot of AI and machine learning are always good ones to go because that's kind of a
Ooh, yeah.
future thing that we got to be aware of. Oftentimes, I'll go to a lot of the like mobile cloud computing kind of things. So
Yeah.
because like on a lot of things that might end up being kind of a replacement for a lot of these desktop applications we're working with, and we need to be aware of that years and years ahead of time so that we can pivot and not be surprised like, oh, no one's using Premiere Pro anymore, they all moved to the mobile thing, which is never going to happen. But
Right.
like if that happened, we'd want to know 4 years in advance so we can start shifting all of our work from Premiere Pro to, I don't know, whatever new game dev.
Yeah.
So that's the other part. Whatever people complain about and whatever we learn at trade shows. And like most of our labs guys, like we're very interested in what we are testing and benchmarking. So like my own personal like Reddit feed has like the video editing subreddit and the Premiere Pro and the Resolve and all those ones. And like I'm on those subreddits all the time, and you see what people complain about because that's the most valuable thing to us. What do people complain about?
Yeah, because that's what we do. We solve problems, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You mentioned oh man, I lost it now. The like remote or cloud based, in particular, editing seems to be coming up. There's one in particular that I know we've
Rush.
No, well, Rush, that's a little bit more mobile, but oh bugger, it's a
cloud.
It's a
Would it be
cloud-based.
not Filmora? Was it Luma?
Not Bimbox.
Bebox.
That's it. Yeah, Bebop.
Bebop technology. Yeah.
So that sort of thing seems to be. It's
kind
still
of a
very
fake
new.
cloud.
It's still very. It still seems fairly new. But that's one of those things that we kind of keep an eye on. What do you think about that kind of thing? Like, how is that panning out so far?
Yeah, well, because I mean, you have two different ways you can do cloud computing. One is like true cloud computing, where like you upload your data and like the cloud processes it. Like that's used a lot for like photogrammetry work. There's some other things like transcription services. Some of those are cloud based, so you just like upload your video and it gives you back closed captions. And then you have the like, I guess it's computing, but it's really just like remote desktop. So essentially the exact same thing we're doing with all of our test platforms, only they're doing it through like software levels, and it's like a virtual desktop. That's what like Bebop is doing. And there's a lot of problems with that. One, in order to be cost effective, you need to be using server hardware and like dividing it up. So you have, a couple 64 core, 48 core Xeons in this, server box, and it's got a couple of Quadros or Tesla cards that can be divided up across 128 users or whatever. And then you feed that to 30 people can access that one box. And like, that's okay for some things. That's great for, I don't know, I'm just gonna make something up here. IKEA, like they have all of their like stations throughout the IKEA store. But I don't know if they actually do this, but they could go all of those to like a single server somewhere, and it's just all virtual desktops, so they don't actually have to have anything on the show floor. Like they can use their iPad and they can get full everything. But the problem with doing that for times where performance matters, so like video editing, is that you don't have very good performance. Like you might get a couple of cores, or even if you do get a lot of CPU cores, they're generally going to be a couple generations old. And they're going to be from a really, really high core count Xeon, which has low frequency usually. So they're not going to be great for what you're doing. Same thing with the video card. Like you're going to be using a Tesla, which already isn't all that great, but you're also only getting like 1/64 of it or 1/16 of it. And so that's not really going to be all that powerful. So performance wise, they're not great. I was at, what was it? Might have been Adobe Max last year, where it was a Amazon cloud services, pretty much sales pitch. And they're going through how great it is. You can use this thing. Like you don't have to pay for upgrades because like, they do all the upgrades. You don't have to handle support and all that kind of thing. And then near the very end, they finally talked about performance a little bit. And I think what they said was something along the lines of like, well, are you going to be editing HD footage with this? No, but you can use proxies down to like 480p or 480i or whatever it is, and like it can work. It's like you can't even edit HD. You're having to pay. Like it's a lot. I forget what Amazon is, but Bebop, I think it was something like you buy a $6,000 workstation every 2 years, and it comes out to be the same cost. So it's
Wow.
like, and that
Every 2
$6,000
years?
workstation is going to be way faster,
Yeah.
and you don't have to like upload all of your data because like you have
Well, yeah,
you know
that takes
80
forever
gigs of
too,
data or something. Like,
right?
so I
Huh.
think the big thing with cloud is it depends on where your data is. If your data is easy to get in the cloud, or if it's already in the cloud, cloud
Yeah.
processing is amazing. But if you have to upload it, meh. And if you need like good real time performance, I don't think
Yeah.
it's not going to be anytime soon. Um, the things that people complain or think that would be bad for cloud stuff is like latency and like
Yeah.
video quality. That stuff's actually fine. I mean, think about it.
Oh.
Like we play video games and like,
Yeah,
the
that's true.
latency is not bad. Like, why can't you do that through virtual desktops? And you totally can. Like
Yeah.
the latency is fine. Video quality is okay. Some of them have really good compression, and like I don't know if I would use it for like coloring, like if you're a colorist, but like an
Right.
editor, yeah, it could be fine. But
Hmm.
uploading all your data and having to use low res and low quality proxies
Right.
is just not great.
Huh. Well, it's almost like some of these guys ought to get these hardware IKVM things and just have like a big machine, like
Yeah, but that's just
a couple desktops in an office somewhere.
yeah, it's just that that's not cost effective. I think because like you get one of those servers, yeah, you're paying 20 grand for the server, but you can divide it up to like 30 users.
Sure.
Versus a normal desk, you're going to have to pay 5 grand. Even at the lowest end, like a 2 grand, and it's one user, and you have to like you know you have all of the because yeah, you have to pay for power supplies for every single user and storage drives and RAM, and it's not really
Hmm.
economical. I think to
Yeah.
do that kind of a thing. Um,
Okay. So
but
I wonder, would you care to speculate? We have a question from YouTube about the Ryzen 5000 processors, and since I know I personally, when I usually encounter this sort of topic on unreleased, untested product, I tend not to. I personally don't like to speculate. I
well,
ride
don't
the
worry, I
patient.
prepared.
I ride
I
the patience
prepared.
ferry. Rather than like I don't buy tickets on the hype train. So,
Yeah.
but we do have a question. Pedro Rojas asks, so far you think what has been said about the new 5000 processors? Believe that they could be good to work with in the Adobe suite. That's assuming what's known so far.
So pretty much, what do we know publicly? IPC is supposed to be a lot better. So single threaded performance is supposed to be a lot better. Core count
That's
has
what I've
not
seen.
gone up over last gen.
Right.
There's a bunch of like random stuff they've talked about, like chiplet designs or something that like who knows if it'll be better or worse. Um, I think the main thing is the single core performance that they say is supposed to be a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's true, they should be great. But like, who knows if that's true or not? Wait till
Right.
November 5th
Yeah.
because that's when they're actually launching. That's when like reviews and stuff will be up. And because yeah, I always say never believe like product announcement benchmarks that like I don't care if it's Adobe, Intel, Nvidia, or anything,
Yeah.
anyone out there, never believe any of them. They could be accurate, but more than likely they're very cherry picked.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
as an example, Nvidia saying, "Oh yeah, you could totally do 8K gaming if you play Minecraft." You know.
yeah. Well, and there was one product launch. I think I've talked about this in the past. There was one product launch they did. I'm not going to say who or what it was, but it was they included in their like tech brief or like a launch summary a benchmark performance result, and it like we looked at it. It's like that doesn't make any sense. I think it was a GPU launch and it was the CPU based test. It's like it would
Oh.
be like showing bench multi-core performance as a GPU like validation for hey, you should buy our GPU because the system is the same as this more expensive GPU in Cinebench.
Oops.
Okay, great. That means nothing. So some of those like it makes you wonder like are actual engineers who understand the technology picking these results, or is it marketing who is just going like that one's big, let's use it,
Yeah.
or that one. So like it's tough. I always wait, never pre-buy. It's just like you never buy a game pre-launch. You always wait for it to launch. Houston.
Hey, I got Baldur's Gate 3 early access.
But
Hardware,
yeah, so I
though.
would.
Yeah, I don't trust hardware before launch ever.
Yeah, and hardware is really tough though, because like a game, like it's all digital now. Like whatever you buy it on launch day, you have it. Whereas like physical products, it can be hard because it seems like more and more because there's becoming more competitive competition between Intel and AMD and AMD and Nvidia, and hopefully soon Intel, AMD, and Nvidia.
Woo.
They're pushing the boundaries a lot more. Like it seems like supply isn't as good or demand is a lot higher or whatever it is, whichever reason you want to believe that why there's not good supply or availability at launch, like that is a reason to pre-order. And like we do that, like we buy as much as we can of a new product before it launches for use in our workstations. But it's a little bit different because like we know we're going to be moving to it. It's not for upgrading our home computers or something. It's for new workstations. So like there's no reason anyone's going to buy our RTX 2080 when the 3080 is out,
Right.
if it's the same price. So like for us, it makes sense. For end users, and honestly, the first like month after a product launch is a mess anyway. Like there's so
Yeah.
many bugs,
Driver
there's so many
issues,
issues.
weird
Just wait.
compatibility stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, unless like upgrading is going to make you money, which for a lot of our customers it does. Like
Right.
we have some people who say like, as soon as you give me 10% more performance, tell me and I'll buy a $10,000 workstation, because to them like 10% means that they'll make back that $10,000 in like a week.
Right.
And great for them, sure. If you're not in that category, just wait. It's going to be so much simpler and easier and less frustrating.
Yeah.
And then you can actually see if it's worth it.
Right. So Timo TT on YouTube is wondering, how long should I run memtest?
Oh man, I haven't been in production for years. You were in production more recent than me, Houston. Wasn't it like you try to get 2 passes at least?
Actually, the last I was doing it, it was 20 is the default.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess when I was in production, it was CPUs were a lot slower, so it took a lot longer to run that test.
Yeah. Usually that can be done. We tend to do it overnight. I'm sure it only takes 4 hours or so. It's probably not that long. I've never really paid attention to the timer. I just know that we have I don't know if it's a little script or if it's just a setting that you can set in memtest, but I think right out of the box, memtest will default to 4 passes, but we run 20.
Seems like a good amount. And that seems like a lot, actually. I'd be really curious to see like how often something doesn't show up in the first pass.
Yeah, honest to goodness, if you're gonna have memory problems, you're probably gonna have memory problems almost immediately. Like the odds are very slim that, and even then, even if it is like suspect, like say you're getting some weird intermittent issue, and it goes away with removing one of your RAM sticks, and memtest says it's good, it's probably something else.
Yeah.
Just
for reference, I looked up our failure rates. So we only use like not overclocked RAM,
Right.
like the most stable RAM you're going to find, and our failure rate over the last year is 0.4%.
0.4. Oh, wow.
0.4. Now, I mean, like if you have
thought.
4 sticks in your system, adding up percentages is really difficult.
Yeah,
I know it's not just like you can't just like
linear.
straight add them up, but whatever. If you had 4 sticks, that's probably about a 1 in 50 chance that you have a stick that could fail. Like that's actually fairly high if you think about it that way.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you say it was 0.4. Like I would have thought closer to like 0.02% or something like.
No. Well, and most of that we catch in the shop. Failure rates in the field is only 0.07.
Yeah, that's closer to what I thought it would have been. So,
yeah, that's like 1 out of thousands.
yeah. RAM's really, really good these days.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you can always get bad batches. You can always get things happen, but yeah, RAM's pretty. It's getting there. I think that actually might be close to. No, CPUs are lower. What are CPUs? Man, now you've gotten me looking into like numbers, and I love numbers. But yeah,
Oh yeah, I love our
CPUs
failure rates. It's fun.
over the last year, CPUs have a failure rate of 0.8%. So your CPU is twice as likely to have a problem, DOA problem, as a single stick of RAM. Now again, you have multiple sticks of RAM, but still, like that's pretty amazing. Like I remember back in the day, it was like RAM was like 4% failure rate, way back when.
Sure.
Like it was a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the manufacturing's gotten so much better. The like soft error correcting has gotten so much better, that like, yeah, it's just so much lower. Failure rates on so many things. Man, production's spoiled. They don't know how spoiled
sure.
they are.
Oh man.
But yeah, but now we have to deal with like motherboard issues that like it doesn't just straight fail, but like it acts weird, or video cards that have coil whine, and things like that. There's just different things you have to deal with now.
It seems some more of those sort of subjective issues, like oh, my power supply makes a funny noise, but only when I'm watching Netflix at 4K or something.
Yeah. Well, I think we were having something with the RTX 3090s where we're having a few where they have some weird noise, not like coil line, if you are using the T cores, so for ray tracing, and like. So like we don't know, like maybe it's just coincidental. A couple of GPUs were having this similar issue. Maybe there's actually an issue. I don't know. But like things are, yeah, it's just different things we've got to deal with now. And it feels like the things we have to deal with now are way more intermittent. Like a bad stick of RAM, that's easy. But now like things are so complex. There's so many. I mean, video cards aren't just video cards. Now there's tensor cores and RT cores and all this other crap.
Right, because like maybe you have something. Yeah, like it only happens when you're doing something machine learning, and
exactly. Yeah, and so it's really hard because like, I mean, we run Firmark to do like full load, like maximum power draw tests.
Right.
But like that doesn't test the tensor cores. It doesn't test RT cores. It doesn't test all this other stuff. So it's tough.
So no need for a name asks, what do you make of ECC RAM in video production? Slower, less faults, or not worth it?
Not worth it. It is slower. The RAM itself, I think I don't know. It's been a while since we tested, but I think the last time we tested it was like 2% slower at the same timings and frequency. It's like it's not massive, but it is a little bit slower. But the biggest thing is you usually, no, you don't have to anymore. It used to you'd have to get like a Xeon in order to get ECC. Right. And you still do on the Intel side, but I think Ryzen and Threadripper, don't they support ECC now?
I believe so. Yeah, I think
now
since Ryzen 2, I think.
Yeah, I would be very hesitant about whether or not it's actually working, because the problem is that ECC has to have proper motherboard support. And man, even back when ECC was like a much bigger deal because RAM had higher failure rates, it was really hard to tell if ECC was working or not. Like there were some tools that would report it, but like not reliably. Sometimes it would have false positives, sometimes false negatives. You'd have to use like 5 different tools, and just whichever one most of it says, you just kind of hope, because there's no way to really do it unless you're bombarding it with like radiation or something, trying to cause failures. So yeah, pretty much we don't think it's worth it. The only times where I feel it is servers, because like maximum uptime is like number one. Like who cares about 2%? You're already using Xeons and stuff that supports it, and it's not that much more expensive than normal RAM. So yeah, use it. Or if that's the only way you can get the RAM capacity, so in that case it wouldn't be ECC, but you'd be using registered ECC. So you need 2 terabytes of RAM. Yeah, you're going to get ECC, and with that much RAM, yeah, you probably should have it anyway. And if it's like life critical. So if you're doing simulations of like bridges or football stadiums, yeah, use ECC. If you're editing a video that's going on YouTube, whatever. Because I don't know how often like blue screens are caused by memory these days. Most of the time when I see like blue screens or hear about them, it's because it could be RAM, but if it's RAM, it's usually because they're running outside CPU spec. Like they're using 3600 RAM on an Intel CPU that only technically supports 2666. And like, yeah, that can be stable. It can be stable in MIM tests, it can be stable in stress tests, but that doesn't mean it's always going to be stable. And I think even soon we're going to be pushing it a little bit. We're going to be starting to use 3200 on all Ryzen CPUs. And that's pushing it because technically it supports 3200 RAM, but only if you're using 2 sticks in their like single rank or dual rank, one or the other, where it's like it's really hard to figure out. And then like it goes down all the way down to like 2300 or 2133 or something if you're using all of the sticks and actually large capacity RAM. Like no one runs it at 2133. But so we're doing a whole bunch of testing to find out if like 3200 is stable enough for us, and it looks like it is. But like, man, using like really high frequency, really tight timing stuff, again, it can pass all your stress tests. But yeah, usually one of the first things I say if someone's like has a DIY build and they are having some intermittent issues is like, set all of your system, your RAM stuff to like JEDEC timings, like 2666 CL19, I think it is. Yeah. And just like see if it gets better. And if it's way more stable, you found your problem. If it's not, something else. You can always turn your settings back up. But you know, honestly, even for everything we did, like we've done some RAM speed testing. It's like, yeah, okay, going from 2666 to 3600 will net you 3%.
Yeah, I don't know. That's like margin of error.
Yeah, exactly.
And what's 3%? Like, yeah, it's silly.
And there are times it makes a bigger difference. And especially like I know in gaming sometimes it does, and there's a few productivity apps, but for most of the stuff we deal with, it's just not worth it.
Right.
But the original question of ECC also usually not worth it.
Yeah. All right, so we do have maybe a suggestion here for you. Mahdi Abbas asks, he says, hey, I edit 4K raw video on an R7 2700X with a 1070 Ti, 32 gigs of RAM, 1 terabyte SSD. What do you think I should upgrade? I'm getting dropped frames and crashing in Adobe Premiere, and I have a BMPCC 4K, by the way.
Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know.
Very popular cameras. They're really cool. Well, the crashing, I'd be really curious what RAM speed you're running at, actually, after all this conversation. But crashing shouldn't happen. I don't think that's a hardware upgrade thing. That's you've got some problem or like drivers. Seems like Premiere has gotten a lot more finicky with GPU drivers. So definitely try making sure all your drivers and Windows are all up to date. Oh, you're also getting blue screens. I see in chat now too. Yeah, you got some system problems you got to sort out. Probably worth running like mid test and stuff. But as far as like pure performance upgrades, probably the CPU. Premiere Pro, unless you're using a lot of GPU accelerated stuff, which, well, I mean, there is. I'd also be curious what codecs you use, because I think the Blackmagic cameras can do, well, Blackmagic RAW. I think they do ProRes and H.264. If you're using Blackmagic RAW, don't in Premiere, because it's like a plugin and it's not like great support. If you're using ProRes, it should be fine. Definitely CPU then. If you're using H.264, you might want to try the beta of Premiere Pro. They added GPU decoding for H.264 and HEVC, which makes a massive difference. And if that alone, it kind of makes your CPU almost moot for like with those kind of footage. So you could try the beta, try making sure GPU decoding is on, and just see if that just fixes all your performance issues, because the difference is it's
huge.
Amazing how much better it is.
Yeah. Well, I hope that helps. That does take us a little bit to our hour. We have a minute or so before we hit the an actual hour. He says LOL RAM is at 3000. I had it at 32.
Yeah, you could try going all the way down to 2066, or heck, just go way down. Just go to like 2133, like CL21. Like it's not going to make that much difference for performance, but it'll tell you whether the RAM is the problem or not. But I suspect, you could also have things like it could be a bad motherboard with like that much crashing power supply. That stuff gets really tough. And honestly, I haven't done troubleshooting like that in so long, because anytime I have an issue, I just bring my computer to work and I just like throw hardware at it until it stops behaving badly. But I know you can't really do that.
Spoiled.
As an end user. Oh, Blackmagic RAW. Okay, so he also said Blackmagic RAW. That plugin for Premiere Pro, I've heard really bad things about. So it's not natively supported in Premiere Pro. I would try transcoding or using proxies. If you use proxy workflow, that might be enough. And then you can still use the Blackmagic Raw for like exporting your final product. I know that kind of sucks for, time, but yeah, I wouldn't use Blackmagic Raw on Premiere Pro yet. So.
Right on. Awesome. Well, thanks, Matt. That was I feel like that was very helpful for.
That was a very fast hour.
Yeah, it does seem to go pretty quick sometimes. Yeah, well, so that does bring us to the end of our hour. So we're gonna say goodbye. Thanks, Matt, for taking time out of your day and joining us and give us a little peek behind into some of the kind of the mindset and process of what you do in labs and labs in general as well. Yeah, so that was actually really cool. Hey, every time I do one of these, I get a little better, more information and peek behind into just how things get done. It's really interesting stuff. So I thank you very much.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about like how we automate everything either.
Oh yeah, maybe next time.
There's so much more.
Yeah. And I'd also like to thank the audience as well for joining us. We do this every Wednesday and Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific. Wednesdays we bring in industry experts. Sometimes like Matt, other times it's usually external industry experts, VFX, audio, sound design, photographers, all those sorts of, basically our customers, bring them on and they give us a little bit of insight into their workflow and process and how and why they do the things that they do. And then Fridays we have labs, a member of our labs team. This week will be Don, which I'm super excited for. It's always a blast talking with Don. And that's more of a hardware software crossover kind of talk, where we kind of take questions and try and help out the audience with those sort of questions, like what do I need to make my photos work better or whatever, that kind of a thing. So thank you guys. Mark your calendars. Wednesdays, Fridays, 1 p.m. Pacific every week. So we'll see you all next time. Bye.
See you guys.